right. If you don't mind opening up the notes, add yourself as a participant. If you have any agenda items, please feel free to add them. And we can go ahead and probably kick it off. Is anyone interested in being the scribe today?
I'll go ahead and do it. I only have a quick update at the end.
All right, thanks. Jonathan, does that mean that you want the next one?
Yeah, I can take it. Next one, yeah.
Sounds good. All right. I think we can probably go ahead and kick it off then. Thomas, looks like you're up first.
The remote evaluation protocol. So just to sum up what happened already. So we had a meeting, I think it was last week, to start discussing about the remote evaluation protocol. And so we have a Slack channel for it. If you want to follow the topic, I think it's called OpenFeature Remote Evaluation Protocol, something like that. And we have currently two things. One is a vote to find the right name for the wire protocol, because it was kind of confusing in the beginning. And second one is, I think Todd just opened a request about some goals of this wire protocol. So maybe something you want to have a look into. I don't know, Todd, if you want to add something on that.
I'll just add a link to it, but it's pretty self-explanatory. And the name is up for debate, so I just put something in there, but we can obviously amend it.
Yeah, it's for the naming part, it's a discussion in the OpenFeature organization. And yeah, that's it.
All right, sounds good. Let me, I'll link that discussion too. So if anyone wants to check it out real quick, definitely feel free to look at it and comment. All right, it is right. Oops, sorry, I just crushed someone's comment there. Okay, Lucas, looks like you're up next then.
Yeah, so I brought this up after a question regarding the JavaScript SDK. So we had the problem that we have like components that are kind of in between being SDKs and being like wrappers or integrations for some components. And Luis even joined, so he brought it up that he was looking for something for Nest.js, which brought some confusion there, and people brought Next.js also into it. But basically it was about Nest, and maybe Next would have the same problem in the end, and there could be others. And maybe it could also be the problem for Java or whatever, maybe having a Spring integration, or I don't know. And so I just thought to bring it up because I don't know how to decide it, how we decide, do we want to have a Nest or Next or whatever wrapper in the SDK? Is it contrib? Should it move? That was something that also came up. And like from my meaning or from my opinion, I thought that it was like a bit, how much do we want to support it? How much is it core of it? That was just like my gut feeling for how we should decide. But it's also just my gut feeling, so I really don't know what to do or what we want to do with this.
Yeah, I mean, I had a kind of a similar thought too. It's like there's a certain level of support, I think, that would be implied if it was part of like the regular SDK repo, which I think is totally fine depending on like our commitment to a particular technology. Another idea potentially for something like Nest, which the names are brutal. I can't believe they have Next and Nest, but at any rate, for Nest, they actually, it may be something that we could put in their org too, potentially. So that could be another thing to keep in mind. Certain projects may be okay having like this integration in as part of their project, which would be kind of cool too. So not sure if certainly not all projects would be up for that, but there may be a few, and we may want to like start there first and then move back to our org if it doesn't fit well into theirs.
Yeah, so that fits to what I thought. And maybe also like the question then in the end would be, how is it then maintained? Is it like also maintained as we maintain the core, or as we maintain the SDKs, or as we do it in the contribs, or is it maybe even by the Nest.js people, for example? I think a good solution for finding it and having it visible to people that it exists is really the site that we have, the ecosystem site. So this would not be a problem, that it's not in the repository, I think. But still, we would have to decide on that maybe, and that's hard to do, I feel.
Yeah, I
also
mean,
not,
maybe, oh,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, and maybe also I'm a bit struggling how we kind of come to a point now and just decide on something.
I mean, maybe one of the ideas is like if we have like a kind of a sponsor to sort of be responsible for one of these integrations, then maybe it makes it a little bit easier to put it in like the regular, SDK repo. I think that'd be the ideal spot, unless maybe there's a couple places where maybe it's better in like the project org, like the other is the technology that we're trying to support. But I'm personally okay with it being in the SDK repo. The one caveat to that is I think JavaScript is the only one that's set up as a monorepo right now, for the SDKs. So that would maybe be a bit of a challenge to, retrofit Java. But sorry, go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, I was just going to say that like even though like I think a lot of these SDKs, kind of SDKs we're talking about, which are Nest and Next, like they're primarily, well, Nest is primarily just going to be a wrapper interface around the Node SDK, right? Like that is pretty much like it's going to maybe be a couple hundred, like maybe 100, 200 lines of code. Like I don't imagine it's going to be all that complicated. But yeah, I think it is important to publicly say that it's like the Nest SDK, like not say it's like a wrapper or something like something that's like lesser than an SDK, because like for people who are developing Nest, like this is the interface, even though like the majority of the code is just the underlying Node SDK. It's kind of the only point I really wanted to make. And then yeah, how we sort of like say the level of support, like that's kind of I guess a broader question, and how we telegraph that.
Yeah, I think that also fits pretty well to what we did with the React SDK, right? So this is also not more than that. It's just like being idiomatic about how we interface with the SDK. So, and to answer what you said, Mike, I would be fine like being sponsor for Nest explicitly, maybe with Luis, or maybe he wants to do that because he said that if not, I could help out there. So we could decide for this at least. And yeah, I don't know if you're hearing us because you are here. Otherwise, we can write about that, Luis.
I guess the one complication that I just thought of looking at the ecosystem page is that like, how do providers then say that they they support the Nest SDK, even though they kind of all will implicitly support the Nest SDK if they support the Node.js SDK. You know what I mean? Like I guess that's something we could update that page to kind of do,
But
but
would we
yeah,
need
it's gonna
to
be a
though? I
bit
mean,
confusing.
my assumption would be that it would just work. Like if you have a Node SDK or Node provider, then it should just work with Nest, and that's kind of the beauty of this model, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm just worried to like end users coming to the OpenFeature website. It might not be clear to them that like there's any providers that support Nest, right? Like I guess people using Nest know it's Node, but yeah,
Got
that
it. Okay, so
connection
it's
won't be
probably more of a
explicit.
documentation issue,
Yeah.
likely at that point. Okay.
Yeah, we could just make things render in such a way that if you say Node, you get all of the like associated badges with Node, maybe. Like if this is just a documentation concern, that might be one simple solution.
Just to
Like if
add,
we have a
like,
Nest.
this like Next is probably the worst. Like we have people who don't quite like, because the rendering model in Next, especially if you tie it with something like Magic, like Vercel, is like really complicated. And when you're adding flags into that, it gets even more complicated. And we have people who kind of conceptually don't understand where things are being served from, whether it's server side, client side, all this sort of stuff. So this example of Next is probably like it's kind of like the worst, right? Like so yeah, It's only downhill from here if we can sort this one out, I think.
Ben, I think you're confusing
And
Next.js
I'm
and
doing the same
Nest.js.
thing now.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, we're talking about Nest, which is like a Node. It's like a Node.js API framework.
Oh, okay, pardon me.
Yeah, it's simpler than doing Next.
Although
Yeah,
your point
so
still
Name
stands,
that
Ben.
project.
Your
I
point still
think it
stands, Ben. I think it's a similar thing where if people support JavaScript, like does it
Yeah,
really make sense to support Next? So I think your
yeah.
point still stands, but the thread was about Nest.
Yeah, it's kind of
Next,
JavaScript's really interesting as well. Like the expectation around developer experience from JavaScript developers is like really high because the tooling now is really good. And yeah, if everything doesn't magically just work, they're like, what? You know what I mean? They want to know why. Yeah,
I think we should actually treat let me get this right, Next.js as a very special case because it actually is going to require both a server side and client
exactly. Yeah,
side integration at the same time. So like we should almost treat that as like a different problem than kind of like other more straightforward front end frameworks like React and back end frameworks like Nest, which are more straightforward.
But to go back to Jonathan's point, I think this is where it comes to the documentation to say this Nest or Next.js required this type of provider. So meaning node provider or client-side provider, and make it explicit in the documentation what is the kind of provider we require to work with. And so it kind of changed the way of doing it. It's like when you go to the SDK, you know the type of provider you want, rather than you start with the provider to go to back to the SDK. But yeah, I don't know if it works or not.
Yep. There's definitely some stuff to consider here. We've actually already gotten a couple issues for Next specifically because they were running it in the wrong like context mode and stuff. And it's just like, it's a really tricky problem. So I think that's something we'll have to probably address now that, yeah, Next is becoming quite popular. Not sure if that totally answers your question, but I think we should start with the SDK, especially for JavaScript. It's already set up quite well for that. If we have, if it's a popular enough, framework and we have someone that can basically dedicate time and effort to it, I think. If it's not, then maybe Contribs or another place would be a better place for it.
I guess a good example here would be like for React, we say we have a React contrib, I guess like interface, but I don't see it like on the public website anywhere. Like, what's the process of getting that to that point?
The React one's actually part of the regular SDK repo, but it's like highly
Okay.
experimental, so we haven't put it anywhere yet. So that is kind of the precedence that we're setting though. It's like, and all of the bundling and tooling and stuff is already built for that. And all it does is basically provide like convenience wrappers on top of the web SDK, basically. So yeah. All right. Drew, it looks like you're up next.
Yeah, thanks. So I've got a blog post that I wrote a while ago, just kind of talking about this, like establishing. Let me actually go read the words because naming things is hard. And I'm busy laughing about renaming JavaScript. All right, get my brain back into this. So the open source standardized flag definition language. Started that a little while ago, and just wanted to there was a lot of comments, a lot of really good feedback. I think I've addressed all of it. And so I want to just A, double check that, and then B, like what's the path forward to publishing this and getting people involved also. Like, I'm not sure like what the right place to say, like, if you're interested in this as a proof of concept, I'd like to send some folks to like the right place to discuss further and or get involved in like a technical proof of concept. So yeah, that's what I'd like to just open up for feedback.
I can jump in. Yeah, I think maybe we could just open up a pull request then, I guess, in the docs repo with the blog for the call to action. That's something we need to think about. I think the challenge is right now we don't have like a sponsor necessarily to run with that one. And given just like the current initiative, like the wire protocol, or name subject to change, has been kind of gaining more traction right now. And we have a sponsor. Thomas is helping to run that initiative right now. So that makes the call to action a bit challenging. But I would like to have something, because otherwise we won't know the interest level. So I'm kind of open to ideas right there, but that's kind of the challenge that I kind of currently face with this.
Yeah.
It could be a discussion or something. We could literally just point to like a GitHub discussion more focused on specifically this topic, and we could just have like, a voting mechanism or a place to talk through it. Could be one idea. But I think right now it's like the demand isn't super clear entirely. Like I think it's an interesting problem to solve, and I see the appeal of it, but it's also, we need like pretty broad support to invest the time. So I think
Yeah.
that's the call to action, is figuring out if we have that support. And we can kind of talk asynchronously, I guess, maybe through Slack or something, if we want to figure out what that could be, but I think that's the situation.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm really comfortable with that, as like, and I totally hear you too. Like, where do we go to figure out whether this is traction? I mean, like, I think that's really the overarching question of the blog post. So I think a GitHub discussion works. I can rough up like a proposed post there or something like that, and we can back and forth over Slack. Cool.
Sounds good. Thanks. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? All right. Todd, over to you. And just a quick reminder before I hand it off, I've been posting the notes here. If you have anything to add, please feel free to do that. But over to you, Todd.
Yep. I'll be quick. So the React SDK it is experimental, like Mike mentioned. It is currently a component in our JS SDK, which is a monorepo. Most recently, I opened up this PR, which I just put in the docs. This adds a couple nice to have. So one is you can basically scope providers to a particular React. You can scope an OpenFeature provider to a particular React context provider. So it effectively allows you to have providers for certain areas in your React Markdown and scope them that way. And it's kind of nice because I think it's pretty isomorphic with even in terms of naming with between OpenFeature providers and React context providers. The other thing it does is add suspense support. I had it was a bit of a challenge to write my own suspending hook, or to add suspenseful characteristics to our existing hook. But basically, if you pass in by default, if you don't turn it off, it allows the rendering to suspend while the provider isn't ready. And we already have concepts around that in OpenFeature, so I think it's kind of a nice thing to have. You can just create a suspense boundary in your React application, and then no matter how many feature flags you add or whatever, it's going to suspend until they can actually be rendered. So I think that was a kind of nice addition. Feel free to go take a look. Like I said, I didn't find creating my own suspenseful hook to be something that was particularly well documented by React. So there may be shortcomings with it. Yeah, just take a look, especially if you have a lot of familiarity with React. And I'm hoping that if we can't identify any more huge features there, we can release it relatively soon. Our first non-experimental version, so we just remove that qualifier. Like Jonathan noted earlier in the discussion, it's mostly a wrapper, right? So there's not actually too much code here. It just allows for some React idioms like the suspense I was talking about and the context provisioning. I think that's about it. So take a look if you're interested. I also opened, I might actually merge this soon if I don't hear any feedback, because I also opened like a test app that I also linked in the PR. So once this is the current version is published, you'll be able to run that test app locally and play with some of these features. Because it's experimental, we can always break the API, whatever, if anybody decides, what I did was wrong. I think that's all I have. Any questions? Okay. Thanks.
All right, sounds good. Looks like David's next.
Yes. All right. Perfect. Yeah. So yesterday was the last day to put in your nominations for the governance committee elections that officially kick off tomorrow. How will this work? Well, you'll get a link to the Helios platform. It'll be quite simple. You just have to click and select the various candidates. There will be two questions. One will be for the existing governance committee members, for which there are 4 seats available. And you just get to select 4 people. And then the second question will be instead for the, let's say, new candidates. And there will be 3 seats available. Again, same thing, you just select the candidates and that's pretty much it. The results will only be available to everyone, including myself, at the end of the election. So it works quite well. We've used this in the past. We're also using it for Captain. Yeah, so it's a nice platform. Yeah, so everyone that is a member of the organization, so that is a member of the GitHub organization, has access to the voting platform. I've already added all the GitHub usernames. You can vote more than once, but only the last vote will count. So, I mean, there's no risk that someone votes 5 times for the same people. Yeah, let's say it works quite well. It will count the last one. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If you have any, if I don't know if there are any questions, anyone has any doubts or something you want to know.
Can you add a direct link to the doc to that by any chance?
What do you mean with the doc?
Sorry, the notes, the
Oh yeah, yeah, of course.
meeting notes.
Oh, sorry, I
Under-
understood. You wanted a link to the doc. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll add
Sorry.
it.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks.
All right, any questions on that? Cool. All right, I just have a couple of real quick updates. So we had an issue open in the web SDK a couple days ago because there was no good way to manage context across multiple providers. So this person was actually using 2 different providers powered by 2 different flag evaluation systems, and the context couldn't be shared for whatever reason. I said it basically broke in a certain provider. And so for a couple of reasons, it made sense to actually be able to manage context per provider. I have a pull request open as a draft in the JavaScript SDK, and also have a spec change. It's pretty small, but I definitely appreciate feedback there. It's got enough approvals, but I'm leaving it open till end of day basically today, and I'll go ahead and merge it, and then we'll probably apply it to the JavaScript SDK. If anyone has feedback, definitely let me know. Today's basically your last chance, unless we want to make an amendment to the spec. It also did lead to some interesting terminology. We've called like when you go to grab a client, we've called it a named client. It's kind of there for historical reasons, I would say, because named clients were meant for like telemetry only originally, and now it's meant for basically optionally mapping to additional like registered providers. So it's a pretty cool concept that works pretty well, especially like enterprises that may have multiple tools they need to like try to balance behind a single interface. But it does make the terminology challenging. It hasn't been a huge issue until this change, and I really had to play some like mental gymnastics, I'd say, to make named clients make any sense at all in this context. I'd like to propose that maybe we look at something like provider namespace. This changes nothing from like a implementation perspective. It's just like documentation and like argument names and stuff. But you just kind of wanted to open that up to feedback if anyone has any, likes it, hates it, whatever. And I can go ahead and make the appropriate pull request in the spec to kind of action that change. I'll pause here if anyone has any feedback there. If not, we can work on that asynchronously because it's probably a little bit that you want to dive into.
Was it
I
already in the
strongly
spec to be able to manage? Oh, sorry. was it already in the spec to change startup context for providers?
So
Just
that's
'cause
next. Like that's related to. I have an issue for it right now, but I want to
Okay.
get this one in first because that's a big. I'd say one issue with the current web SDK is if you don't set context before initializing the provider, it makes two calls effectively to the backend. So we were going to have like a convenience method, basically, like at register, you could also pass context and it would do both. But I wanted to get this one in first because you could have like a named provider that could have custom context that needs to be set and all that. It becomes kind of complicated, but we have seen a couple or quite a few people interested in be able to balance between multiple providers. So I think there's legitimate value in doing this.
Cool. Yeah, maybe I should take a look at the spec, but I wonder if for startup context, I feel like it should be provided at initialization time because otherwise you need to start like, especially in backend SDKs, you need to start worrying about read-write locking and all sorts of stuff as soon as you want to manage. Like that's why the managing part jumped out to me, but I can also take it to the specific thread. So
yeah, and I'll link the other issue because I created an issue talking basically about this. It was originally geared towards web, but if you have any feedback too, like maybe there is a server use case that I hadn't considered. But the idea is we want to supply context to the initialization method in the provider, so we could do whatever we need there. If it's past second, it's going to do potentially two calls to your backend, which is obviously a bummer. And not super obvious, I think, if you're just getting started with OpenFeature right now. So I will link that in a second. And then in terms of like the name, Todd, did you have any feedback on that? I think you were trying to say something.
Yeah, I was only going to say I definitely think I don't really care what we name it. I mean, I think namespace is a good candidate. I shouldn't say I don't care, but I'm not married to the idea of namespace. I definitely think that we need to move away from client name because we're effectively using it as something bigger than a client name now. We're using it as a kind of general scope for a bunch of different things. So namespace seems clear to me. But I think we need to improve there for sure. And it, like you said, it wouldn't change behavior anywhere, but I think it would make it a lot clearer what our intent with this thing is, with this field is. So I would support that.
Okay, so I think next up then is we can create a spec issue and pull requests and probably define this in our glossary as well. I think would make sense. And if we get enough support there, we can go ahead and action it. So context, yeah, we definitely need another context to throw into the mix here. All right. And then the last one is one of the action items from our OpenFeature remote evaluation protocol SIG meeting was to work on a survey. I've done 80 to 90% of it so far. I'm just kind of going through last reviews and getting some feedback from a small group first, and then I'll send that out. But basically the idea is to figure out what like how different tools and vendors currently do it, to figure out and see also what's important to them in terms of like, is it telemetry, bundle size, low dependency, things like that, so that we can basically try to leverage that in this like common schema. So that's the idea there. I will share it in the Slack channel as soon as it's available. And yeah, if you have any feedback, definitely let me know. Or if you're interested in doing like a small run survey to be kind of like an early participant to make sure that the survey makes sense, let me know, like ping me on Slack or something, and I'll share it with you. So, that's it for me. It looks like we have one more from Lucas, and just a final thought. Just go ahead and add any last things here if you have anything. Otherwise, this is the last item on the agenda. So, over to you.
Just when I was looking at the ecosystem page, we do not show the env providers and the memory providers. Maybe that's like by intention, but I was just wondering if it makes sense to show them because maybe people want to try it out and then like see that there is something to easily try out. Initially, I wanted to talk about this because I didn't find the Unleash provider. But I've seen that this was fixed. So yeah, I was just wondering if you want to have these like basic testing providers also shown so people see that, or if it's like intentional.
I think we could, as long as there's a like a good README or something that we can redirect people to that explains the purpose. And if people are okay with what it does, then yeah, perfect. And if they want something more sophisticated, then we have options. So yeah, I'm totally fine with it. It wasn't omitted for any particular reason.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, anything else?
I guess alongside that, I did make some changes to just make the provider page a bit more explicit to say like this is a client provider, this is a server provider. So like there's more work we can do on that page for sure.
Yeah, I
It's
appreciate
very
you doing that because it was
it's very information dense.
yeah. But yeah, it was definitely an improvement because before it was like pretty subtle and they all looked the same. So I appreciate the help there. I did slightly reorder it too. So now you see the SDKs pop up first, which I think is a little bit better than basically all of the same vendors or something right up front. But yeah, all the filtering and stuff should apply. So you should be able to, slice and dice it how you need. Yeah. And if you have any other feedback or want to make changes, definitely open to that. Yeah. Anything else? Perfect. I guess we can wrap up here then. All right. Have a nice day, everyone.